The heavy glass door slid shut behind him with a soft, final whoosh, and the world changed. Just moments before, he had been in the swirl of the main airport, a place of controlled chaos where tired families, hurried business travelers, and excited tourists all merged into one noisy, rushing river. But here, in this private terminal, there was only silence. It wasn't an empty silence, but a full one, a quiet that felt expensive and carefully maintained. The air itself seemed different, cooled to a perfect temperature and carrying a faint, clean scent of expensive coffee and polished wood. He stood still for a moment, letting the calm wash over him, feeling the tension of the last few months begin to slowly uncoil from his shoulders. He felt a familiar weariness settle deep in his bones, the kind that comes not just from lack of sleep, but from living in someone else's skin for too long. For the past 6 months, he had been on a film set, every day consumed by lines, by stunts, by becoming a character that was a far cry from the quiet man he was inside. It was a mask he wore well, one that had brought him a life he could never have imagined, but it was still a mask. Now the mask was off. He was just a man in a worn t-shirt and comfortable jeans, looking for a moment of peace. This trip wasn't for work or for a premiere. It was for him. A quiet, anonymous journey to a small, secluded cabin where the only sound would be the wind in the trees and the only schedule would be the rising and setting of the sun. His eyes slowly took in the details of the room. It was all sleek lines and muted colors, soft grays, creams, and dark, rich woods. A massive abstract painting, a swirl of blues and golds that probably cost more than a house, hung on one wall. Plush armchairs were arranged in small, intimate groups, each with its own small table and a lamp that cast a warm, gentle glow. A few people were scattered around the space, but they moved with a quiet confidence, speaking in low, murmured tones. A man in a perfectly pressed suit polished his shoes with a small cloth. A woman in a silk scarf typed rapidly on a slim laptop, and a couple sipped what looked like champagne from delicate crystal glasses. No one was rushing. No one was dragging a screaming child or anxiously checking a departure board. Here, time moved at a different, more leisurely pace. He adjusted the strap of his backpack, a simple, dark green thing he'd owned for years. It was scuffed at the corners, and one of the zippers was a little stubborn, a far cry from the pristine, monogrammed leather luggage he saw sitting neatly near the chairs. His backpack held a few worn books, a change of clothes, and some basic toiletries. It was all he needed. It was, he thought with a small, private smile, his real life, packed into a bag. He didn't have an entourage or a personal assistant fussing over him. He was alone, and that was exactly how he wanted it. It was strange, he thought, how a place designed to make people feel important could instead make him feel like an outsider, an observer peeking into a world he belonged to but never quite felt a part of. He began to walk towards the main check-in counter, his boots making a soft, almost inaudible sound on the thick, patterned carpet. His gait was relaxed, his shoulders slightly hunched, a habit of trying to take up less space in the world. He wasn't trying to draw attention, and in this environment, his simple, unassuming presence was like a single, off-key note in a perfectly orchestrated symphony. He could feel a few subtle glances from the other passengers, not of recognition but of mild curiosity, the kind one might give a piece of modern art they don't quite understand. They saw the clothes, the backpack, the lack of polish, and their minds quietly categorized him, filing him away as someone who didn't quite fit the mold. As he got closer to the counter, the man behind it came into clearer focus. He was sharp and angular, from the points of his polished leather shoes to the precise part in his dark hair. His suit was a deep navy blue, tailored so perfectly it looked like it had been painted onto his lean frame. He was moving with a kind of practiced grace, arranging a stack of glossy brochures, wiping a smudge from the pristine countertop with a microfiber cloth he produced from his pocket. He was the gatekeeper to this exclusive world, the very image of professional, high-end service. He hadn't looked up yet, completely absorbed in his task, a portrait of focused efficiency. The man radiated an air of importance, a subtle but powerful barrier that said, "I belong here." "The question is, do you?" Keanu stopped a few feet from the counter, giving the man his space. He watched him for a second, a sense of calm detachment settling over him. He had encountered this type of person many times before, the person who judges a book so completely by its cover that they never bothered to see the story inside. He didn't feel angry or annoyed, just a little sad. It was a tiring way to live, always measuring and always judging. He took a quiet breath, the air in his lungs feeling clean and light. He was here for a simple reason: to get on a plane and go find some quiet. The drama of other people's egos was a landscape he had no interest in exploring. He was just a tired man at the end of a long road, and the promise of a new, quieter one was just a few feet and a few simple words away. He stepped forward, ready to begin the next, and hopefully much simpler, part of his journey. The man behind the counter finally looked up, and his eyes were like chips of polished ice. They swept over the figure in front of him, a quick, practiced motion that took in everything and understood nothing. He saw the tired eyes, the gentle slope of the shoulders, and the worn backpack slung over one arm. But he didn't see the person. He saw a uniform, or rather the lack of one. In his world, everyone wore a uniform that told their story. Expensive suits whispered of success. Crisp pilot uniforms spoke of responsibility, and even the staff's neat attire showed their place. This man, in his simple clothes, was a blank page, and the attendant felt a sudden, sharp annoyance at being forced to guess. He immediately filled in the blanks with the most logical explanation his mind could produce: a lost delivery driver, a mechanic who had taken a wrong turn, someone who had wandered in from the real world outside and was now polluting the perfect. Filtered air, a tight, professional smile that didn't reach his eyes fixed itself on his face. It was a mask he wore every day, a shield that kept the world and the people in it at a safe distance. He straightened his already perfect tie, a small, unconscious gesture of reinforcing his own importance. He could feel the eyes of the other passengers in the terminal, a silent audience to this little drama. He had a role to play, and that role was to be the unbreachable wall, the guardian of this exclusive club. He would not let its standards slip. Not for a second. The man in front of the counter leaned forward slightly, his movements slow and deliberate. He placed his hands gently on the cool, smooth surface of the counter, as if to steady himself. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but it carried a surprising warmth and calmness. "Hello," he said. "I have a booking. The name is Reeves." The attendant's fingers, which had been poised over his keyboard, froze. He didn't type. He didn't even glance at his computer screen. Instead, he let the silence hang in the air for a moment, a heavy, uncomfortable weight. He was making a point. This was his territory, and he would not be rushed. He looked the man up and down again, this time more slowly, more deliberately, letting his disdain show in the slight curl of his lip. "Reeves," he repeated, the name tasting like something unpleasant in his mouth. He let his gaze drift past the man's shoulder, as if he were suddenly more interested in the pattern on the wallpaper. "And what is it you're here for, sir?" The word "sir" was not a term of respect. It was a tool, used with a cold, sharp edge. The man on the other side of the counter didn't flinch. He just stood there, a picture of stillness. "I'm here for the flight," he said, his voice still even and calm. "The chartered flight to the north." The attendant let out a small, sharp breath that was almost a laugh. It was a sound designed to belittle, to dismiss. He finally turned his attention to his computer screen, his fingers flying across the keyboard in a flurry of loud, aggressive clicks. He wasn't actually looking for anything. He was just performing a search, creating a spectacle of his own supposed diligence. The sound echoed in the quiet terminal, a series of tiny, angry explosions. After a few seconds, he stopped typing and shook his head, a theatrical gesture of regret. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice dripping with a false sympathy that was far more insulting than open anger. "There seems to be no one by that name on any of our manifests today. Are you sure you have the right day? The right terminal, even?" He knew it was a cruel question. He knew the man was in the right place, but he was enjoying this. He was enjoying the feeling of power, the thrill of putting someone in their place. He could feel the eyes of the other passengers on him, and he knew he was impressing them. He was the one in charge, the one who maintained the high standards of this world. He was protecting them from people like this. The man in the worn jeans just watched him, his expression unreadable. There was no anger in his eyes, no frustration. There was just a deep, quiet sadness, as if he were looking at a child throwing a tantrum. He had seen this kind of behavior before so many times. It was a defense mechanism, a way for small people to feel big. He didn't feel the sting of the insult. He just felt a profound sense of weariness, a longing for the quiet cabin and the open sky he had been dreaming of for months. "I'm sure," the man said softly. The attendant leaned forward, placing his hands flat on the counter, mirroring the other man's posture but turning it into a challenge. He lowered his voice, but made sure it was loud enough for the couple in the nearby armchairs to hear. "Look," he said, his tone now dropping all pretense of politeness. "I don't know what you're trying to pull, but this is a private facility. Our clients pay a great deal of money for privacy and discretion. They don't need to be bothered by people who don't belong here." He paused, letting the insult land. He saw a flicker of something in the man's eyes, a brief shadow of pain, and it fueled his cruelty. He was getting to him. He was winning. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," the man said, his voice still holding on to its remarkable calm. "Oh, I don't think so," the attendant said, a smug smile finally spreading across his face. He stood up straight, puffing out his chest. He decided to deliver the final blow, the line that would send this man scurrying away with his tail between his legs. He raised his voice just a little, making it a public announcement. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. The commercial terminal is that way. It's a much more appropriate speed for someone like you." The words hung in the air, sharp and ugly. A few people in the terminal looked up from their phones and their magazines. A woman in a fur coat gave a small, approving smirk. The man with the laptop looked away, a faint blush of embarrassment on his cheeks. The air grew thick with tension, with the unspoken judgment of the wealthy and the quiet humiliation of the man being judged. The attendant felt a surge of triumph. He had done his job. He had protected his world. He stood there, his arms crossed over his chest, a look of cold satisfaction on his face, waiting for the man to finally turn and walk away in defeat. But the man didn't move. He just stood there, his gaze fixed on something just beyond the attendant's shoulder, his expression suddenly changing. The quiet sadness in his eyes was replaced by a flicker of something else, something like recognition. And for the first time, a flicker of doubt began to stir in the attendant's mind. The man behind the counter, the attendant, was still basking in the warm glow of his own perceived victory. He had his arms crossed, a smug, self-satisfied smile plastered on his face. He was the king of his small, sterile kingdom, and he had just banished an intruder. He waited, expecting to see the man's shoulders slump in defeat, to watch him turn and shuffle away, put back in his place. But the man didn't move. His gaze was fixed on a point just over the attendant's shoulder, towards a heavy, unmarked door at the far end of the terminal. The attendant's own smile faltered for a second. What was he looking at? Was this some kind of trick? A last desperate attempt to save face? Then a soft click echoed through the quiet room, the sound of a lock disengaging. The unmarked door swung open, and the world shifted on its axis. A man stepped through, and the very air in the terminal seemed to change around him. He was dressed in the crisp, sharp uniform of a commercial airline captain, but it was more than just the clothes. It was the way he carried himself. He stood, tall, his shoulders back, exuding a quiet confidence that was the complete opposite of the attendant's loud, performative arrogance. His face was weathered and kind, with lines around his eyes that suggested he had spent a lot of time at altitude looking down at clouds. He had a clipboard in one hand, and his smile was genuine. A warm and easy thing that instantly made him seem like the most competent person in the room. The pilot's eyes scanned the terminal, a quick professional check, and then they landed on the man standing at the counter. And in that instant, his whole face lit up. The professional smile transformed into one of genuine, personal recognition and delight. He strode forward, his polished shoes making a sharp, confident sound on the tile floor that transitioned to a soft thud on the thick carpet. He walked with purpose, his path aimed directly at the counter, directly at the man the attendant had just tried to humiliate. The attendant watched him approach, a flicker of confusion in his mind. This was the captain for the G650 flight, the one he had personally cleared. He knew the pilot's name, had seen his file. He was one of the best in the business. But why was he walking towards this person? The attendant straightened up, uncrossing his arms, ready to step in and handle the situation, to explain to the captain that there was an unauthorized person here who needed to be removed. He was still the gatekeeper. He was still in control. But before he could say a word, the pilot was there, standing just a few feet away. He completely ignored the attendant, his focus entirely on the man in the worn jeans. He extended a free hand, his smile wide and respectful. "Mr. Reeves!" The pilot said, his voice a warm, clear baritone that cut through the terminal's hushed atmosphere. "My apologies, sir. We weren't expecting you for another 10 minutes. She's all fueled up and ready to go the moment you are. It's a real honor to have you with us today." The name hung in the air like a physical object. Reeves, Mr. Reeves. The attendant's mind went blank. For a second, the world just stopped. The name bounced around inside his skull, a meaningless sound that refused to connect with anything. Reeves? The mechanic? The lost driver? No, it couldn't be. He felt a strange, cold sensation start in the pit of his stomach, a slow, creeping chill that began to spread through his veins. He watched, as if from a great distance, as the man he had just insulted reached out and shook the pilot's hand. His grip was firm, his smile quiet and tired but genuine. "Thank you, Captain," he said, his voice the same soft, calm tone it had been all along. "Sorry if I'm a bit early, just ready to get in the air." The pilot chuckled, a friendly, easy sound. "I know the feeling. We'll have you there in no time. Smoothest flight you've ever had." And then the attendant's brain finally caught up. The name clicked into place, and with it came a tidal wave of memory. The face, he'd seen it on a dozen magazine covers, on giant billboards in Times Square, on the silver screen. The quiet, sad-eyed man from the action movies. The one everyone said was the nicest guy in Hollywood. The one whose face was recognized by billions of people. A face he had looked at for a full 5 minutes and seen only a bum. The blood drained from his face so fast he felt dizzy. A loud ringing started in his ears, drowning out the soft murmur of the other passengers. His mouth went dry, his tongue feeling like a piece of sandpaper. He could feel his heart hammering against his ribs, a frantic, panicked drumbeat. He was suddenly aware of every single person in the terminal, and he knew with a certainty that felt like a physical blow that they were all looking at him. The couple with the champagne, the woman in the fur coat, the man with the laptop. Their faces were a mixture of shock, pity, and something that looked a lot like smug satisfaction. They were all watching his public execution. His own words came rushing back at him, each one a poisoned dart. Asterisk, are you sure you have the right terminal? Asterisk, I don't know what you're trying to pull. Asterisk, this is a private facility. And the worst one, the one that would echo in his nightmares for years to come. Asterisk, the commercial terminal is that way. It's a much more appropriate speed for someone like you. Asterisk, he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. He wanted to turn back time, just 5 minutes, and treat the man with the basic human decency he deserved. But time doesn't work that way. He was frozen, a statue carved from pure, unadulterated shame. His carefully constructed world of judgment and superiority had just been shattered by a single, polite greeting from a man who actually understood what service meant. He saw the man, Mr. Reeves, give a small, almost imperceptible glance in his direction. There was no anger in his eyes, no triumph. There wasn't even a hint of, "I told you so." There was just a flicker of something else, something that looked like a deep, profound sadness. It was the look you give a child who has just done something terribly wrong and doesn't understand why. That look was worse than any anger. It was a quiet, final judgment that said, "You are a small person." The pilot, sensing the tension, gave A curt, professional nod to the attendant, a gesture that was colder than any glare. He then gestured towards the boarding gate. "Right this way, Mr. Reeves." The man in the worn jeans shouldered his backpack and, with one last, quiet look that seemed to take in the entire scene, turned and began to walk away. He moved with the same slow, relaxed gait he had entered with, but now, every eye in the room was on him. He wasn't an intruder anymore, he was the main event. And the attendant was left alone at his counter, a pale, trembling wreck in a tailored suit, the king of a kingdom that had just crumbled into dust around him. He could feel the sweat beading on his forehead, and he knew, with a horrifying certainty, that this was not the end of it. It was only the beginning. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. It was a thick, suffocating blanket that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. The automatic door hissed shut, sealing off the world where the pilot and Mr. Reeves now existed, a world of quiet professionalism and mutual respect. The attendant remained frozen, his hands still resting on the pristine counter, but they felt alien now, as if they belonged to someone else. He could feel a cold sweat break out on his forehead, a single icy droplet tracing a path down his temple. His heart was a wild bird trapped in his ribs, flailing against his bones with a frantic, desperate rhythm. Slowly, as if coming out of a deep trance, he became aware of the other people in the terminal. The silence was not empty. It was filled with their unspoken thoughts. He could feel their eyes on him, dozens of tiny, sharp needles pricking at his skin. The couple with the champagne had stopped whispering, but they were looking right at him. Their expressions a mixture of shock and a kind of morbid fascination, like people watching a car crash in slow motion. The woman in the fur coat was no longer smirking. Her face was a mask of cold, hard contempt. She looked at him not as a fellow human being, but as a piece of dirt she had just scraped off the bottom of her expensive shoe. Even the man with the laptop, who had seemed embarrassed before, now looked at him with a clear, undisguised pity, which somehow felt even worse. He wanted to run. He wanted to sprint for the same door Mr. Reeves had just walked through, to keep running until he couldn't run anymore. But his feet were rooted to the spot, glued to the expensive carpet by the sheer weight of his own humiliation. He was a statue of shame on display for everyone to see. His mind began to replay the entire conversation, but this time it was like watching a horror movie where he was the victim. He heard his own voice dripping with condescension. Asterisk, and what is it you're here for, sir? He saw the look on his own face, the smug little smile, the way he had looked down his nose at a man who could probably buy and sell this entire airport without a second thought. The words echoed in his head, each one a fresh wave of nausea. Asterisk, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. And the final, devastating line, the one that would be burned into his memory forever. Asterisk, the commercial terminal is that way. It's a much more appropriate speed for someone like you. Asterisk, he squeezed his eyes shut, but it didn't help. He could still see Mr. Reeves's face. Not the famous actor from the movies, but the quiet, tired man who had stood in front of him. He remembered the man's calm demeanor, the way he hadn't gotten angry, the way he had simply stood there and taken it. And then he remembered the final look the man had given him. It wasn't a look of anger. It wasn't a look of triumph. It was that quiet, profound sadness. That was the part that truly broke him. It was a look that said, I see you for what you are, and I feel sorry for you. It was a judgment more final and more cutting than any angry outburst could ever be. It was the look of someone who understood that the greatest poverty was not in the clothes you wore or the money you had, but in the smallness of your own heart. A movement caught his eye, and he opened them. The pilot was standing a few feet away, his back to him. He had a phone to his ear, and he was speaking in a low, urgent tone. The attendant couldn't hear the words, but he didn't need to. He knew exactly who the pilot was calling. He was calling his manager. He was reporting the incident. A cold dread, sharp and metallic, flooded his mouth. This was it. This was the unraveling. His career, his reputation, his entire life, built on the foundation of being the perfect gatekeeper, was about to come crashing down. He tried to form a defense in his mind, some way to justify his actions. Asterisk, how was I supposed to know? He thought desperately. Asterisk, he looked so ordinary, asterisk, but the thought died as quickly as it formed. Ordinary? He looked like a human being. He looked like a man who was tired and wanted to be left alone. He had treated him with less respect than he would have given a stray dog. He had based his entire judgment on a worn t-shirt and a scuffed backpack. He had always prided himself on his ability to read people, to size them up in a second. He thought it was a skill, a part of what made him good at his job. Now he saw it for what it was, a cheap, ugly prejudice. He wasn't a skilled judge of character. He was a shallow, arrogant fool. He saw the heavy door to the manager's office swing open. A woman stepped out, her face stern and serious. She was the terminal manager, a woman known for her no-nonsense attitude and her impossibly high standards. She spoke briefly with the pilot, who gestured once, almost imperceptibly, in his direction. The manager's eyes followed the gesture and they landed on him. Her expression didn't change, but he felt it like a physical blow. There was no anger on her face, just a look of profound disappointment. She didn't need to say a word. He knew he was summoned. The walk to her office was the longest of his life. It was only 50 feet, but it felt like a mile. Every step was an effort. He could feel the eyes of the entire terminal on his back. He kept his head down, staring at the pattern on the carpet, a swirling vortex of gray and blue that seemed to spin faster and faster with every step he took. The polished world around him, the world of chrome and leather and quiet luxury, now felt like a courtroom, and he was the guilty party. The gleaming surfaces reflected his own pale, terrified face back at him. A constant reminder of his failure, he reached the office door and stopped. He could hear the faint, distant hum of the jet engines outside as the plane prepared for takeoff. It was the sound of his dream life flying away, leaving him behind. He was no longer pale with the shock of the moment. He was pale with the sudden, crushing understanding of what he had done. He wasn't just afraid of losing his job. He was afraid of the person he had seen himself become in the mirror of that quiet man's sad eyes. He was a man who had built his world on judging others, and in one single, spectacular moment, his own judgment had condemned him. He raised a trembling hand to knock on the door, knowing that on the other side, he would have to face the consequences of his own ugly, shallow heart. The knock on the office door was so soft it was almost inaudible. A faint tap of bone against wood that mirrored the fragile state of the man who raised his fist. He felt like his entire body was vibrating, not with energy, but with a deep, resonant hum of shame. The door swung inward, opened not by the manager, but by the pilot, who gave him a single, unreadable glance before walking past him without a word. The pilot's face was a mask of professional neutrality, but his eyes held a cold disappointment that was far more cutting than any anger could have been. The attendant stepped into the office, his feet feeling as heavy as lead blocks. The manager was sitting behind her desk, a large, imposing piece of dark wood that was as clean and uncluttered as the terminal she oversaw. She didn't look up immediately. She was finishing a note on a pad, her movements precise and deliberate. The silence in the room was thick, a heavy, suffocating blanket that pressed down on him, making it hard to breathe. He stood there, in the middle of the room, feeling like a schoolboy waiting to be punished. He could feel a tremor start in his hands, and he clasped them behind his back to hide it. Finally, she placed her pen down perfectly parallel to the edge of her desk and looked up. Her eyes were not angry. They were not even cold. They were just empty. It was as if she had already erased him from her world, and was now simply going through the motions of disposing of the problem. "The pilot has filed a report," she said, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. He detailed a significant and unprofessional lapse in judgment. The attendant opened his mouth to speak, to offer some kind of explanation, some pathetic excuse, but no words came out. His throat was a tight, dry knot. She continued, her gaze unwavering. "The report states that you were deliberately disrespectful, that you humiliated a client, and that you created a deeply uncomfortable environment for everyone in the terminal." She paused, letting the words sink in. Each one was a small, sharp stone thrown at the glass house of his career. He finally managed to croak, his voice a hoarse whisper. "I didn't know who he was?" And there it was, the pathetic core of his defense. It hung in the air between them, a flimsy, transparent shield. He saw a flicker of something in her eyes then, a spark of what looked almost like pity, which was infinitely worse than anger. "That," she said, her voice dropping even lower, "is the single most damning thing you could have said? It means your behavior is conditional. It means you treat people with respect only when you think they have something to offer you, when you think they are important. Our company's reputation is built on a single principle, treating every single person who walks through that door with the same level of discretion and respect, whether they are a CEO or a mechanic delivering a part. You failed at the most fundamental part of your job." She picked up a single sheet of paper from her desk. "What makes this situation untenable is not just your failure, it is the grace of the man you insulted." She looked down at the paper. Mr. Reeves did not file a complaint. In fact, when the captain apologized to him for the incident, he reportedly said, and I'm quoting here, "Don't worry about it. We all have bad days." He was probably just tired. That is what he said. The words hit him like a physical blow. He stumbled back a half step as if he had been pushed. The man he had treated like dirt, the man he had tried to publicly humiliate, had defended him, had offered him an excuse. The weight of that simple act of kindness was crushing. It was a kindness he didn't deserve, a compassion that shone a brilliant, unforgiving light on his own ugliness. He felt his legs go weak, and he thought he might fall. He wasn't just a fool. He was a monster. And the kindest man in the world had just shown him his own reflection. "His grace doesn't change the facts," the manager continued, her voice softening slightly, as if she too was affected by the story. "It only makes your actions seem that much worse. We cannot have someone representing our brand who judges people by their clothes. We cannot have a gatekeeper who is blind to the very thing he is supposed to be protecting, human dignity." She slid the paper across the desk towards him. It was a termination agreement. "This is not up for negotiation," she said. "Your employment is terminated, effective immediately. HR will contact you regarding your final paycheck and the return of your company property. Please sign this and collect your personal belongings." He didn't even look at the paper. He just nodded, a slow, mechanical motion. He reached for the pen she offered, his hand shaking so badly he could barely hold it. He scrawled his name on the line, the signature looking foreign and spidery, like the mark of a stranger. He was no longer the sharp, confident attendant. He was a hollowed-out man, a ghost in a tailored suit. He turned and walked out of the office, not daring to look back. The walk through the terminal to the staff locker room was a surreal nightmare. The few people left in the lounge didn't look at him with judgment anymore. They looked through him as if he were already gone. He had become invisible, a non-person. He gathered his jacket and a few personal items from his locker, the simple actions feeling strangely complex and difficult. The uniform he had worn with such pride now felt like a costume. A liar's skin. The automatic doors hissed open and he stepped out into the bright, noisy afternoon. The roar of the traffic, the shout of a taxi driver, the harsh glare of the sun on the pavement, it was all too much. The real world, the world he had so desperately tried to keep out of his pristine terminal, rushed back in, and it was overwhelming. He got into his car, a nice, sensible sedan that had once felt like a symbol of his success, and now felt like a cheap, cramped box. He drove home. But he didn't see the road. He saw the man's face. He saw the quiet sadness in his eyes. He wasn't pale with the shock of being fired. He wasn't pale with the fear of what he would do next. He was pale with the sudden, crushing, and irreversible understanding of who he was. He had built his entire identity on a foundation of sand, on the shallow, arrogant belief that he could measure a person's worth by their appearance. He had been a guard at the gate of a kingdom, but he had never understood that the true value of the kingdom wasn't in its walls, but in the character of the people inside it. And he had just proven he had none. Back in his empty, silent apartment, he finally looked at himself in the mirror. The face staring back was pale, the eyes wide and haunted. He saw a man who had been given a glimpse into his own soul and had found it wanting. The employee went pale with the horrifying, lifelong weight of his own snobbery, realizing that he hadn't just lost his job. He had lost his story. He was no longer the hero of his own narrative, the sharp, discerning professional. He was the cautionary tale, the small-minded man who, in his attempt to guard the door to a world of luxury, had proven he was the one who truly, desperately, didn't belong. And the quiet, forgiving man he had humiliated would forever be the one who had shown him the truth.